everybody. Welcome to Breaking Bread with Alie and Gabby. I'm Gabby Loren.
And I'm Alie Valeria.
In today's episode, we have Rabbi Daniel Bortz, also known as the Millennial Rabbi. So I'm pretty sure he'll be speaking on it today, but that just means that he relates to a lot of millennials and others alike. He's been through his own intense spiritual journey and discovery, and he's done so many things at such a young age. Not only does he have a 6-week program called Soul Living, but he does speaking engagements. He has his own podcast called Beneath the Surface that also coincides with a book that he's published. So this guy just does it all, and we're so happy to have him on the podcast today. And we're going to be talking about not only what he does in his journey, but also a little bit of an intro into Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. So thank you so much, Rabbi Daniel Bortz, the Millennial Rabbi, for joining us today.
Thank you, Gabby and Alexandra, for having me.
Yes. So what made you decide to, go on this spiritual journey? What was that process like?
Yeah, it was a long process with a lot of little events that led up to it. I always felt a spiritual connection to something more, but I never really brought that into my life until I was around 16 years old. I started to, for the first time, feel that there might be something more out there, and it kind of came out of nowhere. And I do believe that God sometimes gives us little gifts of inspiration. We can either run with it, we can take it and go with it, or we can let it go and just fall away. And I really tried to slowly learn more and connect more. It all came to a head around 18 years old. And I was just thinking about it actually today that I was a freshman at UC Santa Barbara. And obviously I wasn't going there to be a rabbi. I like the Isla Vista lifestyle. This is kind of the early 2000s. It was probably a little bit even crazier than it is now. I was already getting really connected to my Judaism and my spiritual connection. And I had a couple moments that year that really that took me over and made me want to pursue it, which led me to going to Israel. So it's a lot to that story, but that's a brief overview. So I remember my freshman year, we had a Shabbaton, a weekend that we went to USC. It was Chabad of USC. So I was a student. I went there, and I remember everyone was sleeping all over the place. I was sleeping probably on the floor somewhere in their house. And in the morning when I woke up, there were these two Hasidic men sitting in the kitchen. It was like 7 a.m. learning from this big book. So I walked in there. I was curious, and I probably wasn't dressed the right way to be learning mysticism, but they put a little suit jacket over my shoulders, cold over there. And I listened to this incredible wisdom. I still to this day remember, this is probably 16 years ago, they were saying about how when we die in the world to come, God's light comes to us almost like the sun. It's so powerful that we couldn't handle it. But by doing mitzvot, by doing God's will in this world and learning Torah, it's almost like wearing sunglasses. It's almost like wearing clothing or sunglasses that allow you to receive this energy. Why? Because what you're learning and doing is the divine will. So it's almost preparing you for that experience. I just remember I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I continued to explore that and just learn more and more powerful stuff that really resonated with me. And then I left off to Jerusalem, where I left Santa Barbara, and I started just spending all day learning Torah in depth. I only wanted to study the mystical side, but I realized I had to learn the Talmud and the halacha and everything, which is kind of the meat and potatoes of Judaism, which allows you to ground your roots, and then you can grow and take the fruit as well. That took me on a journey around the world, Toronto, Connecticut, little missions around the world to make Passover Seders in Ukraine and all this crazy stuff. And finally, I got my rabbinical ordination in 2010 in Israel and came back to California to start working with the community.
Wow. So you went on your Shabbaton, which is what inspired you to go to Jerusalem to start learning. What were you seeking? Were you raised religious and then you just started to become more curious about Judaism, or what was it that inspired you to go to Israel?
So my family was not religious growing up, but they started to get more involved slowly but surely. My mom was, my mom's French, my dad's South African. They didn't grow up with much Judaism. And my mom, when we came to California from South Africa, she went to this class where this rabbi said, "Who knows the names of the parents of Jesus?" So my mom raised her hand, Joseph, Mary, said, "Who knows the name of the parents of Moses?" And she's like, I have no idea. It's actually Amram and Yocheved. It's not as well known. She's like, I know so much more about other cultures and religions than my own. So she started learning, and luckily my dad kind of liked it too. And they started growing slowly, Shabbat, kosher, things like that. But of course, when I hit the teenage years, I wanted to do my own thing, go to public school, hang out with my other friends. And I went down the wrong path, you could say, as we all have our teenage experiences. So I kind of came to it on my own, although I had some background too. And I just started to feel like a spiritual connection that I needed answers to what that was. And I found that in Jewish mysticism and Torah, that kind of, that experience with those two Hasidim at USC was just one of many that were occurring throughout this experience. I went to Israel in the summer after high school. I went to Tzfat with my brother, and I was with a group of guys like praying outdoors in the beautiful nature. And I felt this, like, I imagine, I've never done LSD, but I imagine that is what that is for them. Like, I literally felt, except it was sober, it was totally natural. I felt one with all. I felt, it's not like a God in the sky that I felt was a separate being. I felt completely at peace, and that everything kind of melted together and everything made sense. Like, there was a certain like underlying unity. Like, I imagine astrophysicists or quantum mechanic professors look at the world that way, in a mental way, where they realize that what we see is not what it is. There's like more going on. So that kind of, these experiences were leading me to want to explore, like, what is that more?
It's funny you mentioned that. I feel Israel has a funny way of making you feel these things more enhanced and more intense. But also, part of my journey, I've always felt like a little bit more connected to Source, to Hashem, my entire life, even with having no knowledge really of Judaism from the very beginnings. Like, I had very small like education from going to Hebrew school, but it was more secular, so we didn't really get to like the spiritual side of everything. But I always kind of felt that connection. Do you feel like you had that connection before you even went to Israel? Like, there was something there, you didn't know what, and then you had to explore it more for it to kind of really blossom?
Yeah, I again, like, it might have been earlier on in different ways, but it really got loud and powerful around like 16, 17 going. I went through a lot just before that. And for whatever reason, there's different explanations in Kabbalah, what that can be, like how you could all of a sudden get an inspiration. But I felt that connection before I went to Israel, a few years before. And I would say, funny enough, when we like in San Diego and in Santa Barbara, I might never reach the levels I was at then, even though I've gone through all that it's become more grounded and real. Almost like you could compare like the first few weeks of meeting a soulmate compared to, let's say, 20 years of marriage. So the 20 years of marriage is much more real. Like, it's not this flame and this, it's more quiet, but it's more like grounded and real experiences that you've had together. But in a way, it's hard to recapture that experience, that newness, that like, wow, like there's something more. And that was so powerful. I was like on a honeymoon with God for like a long time. I would be like in Santa Barbara, there's like parties around me. I'd be on my bike or near the beach and walking around. And I was physically there, but my mind, I was in another place. I saw everything differently. I was like, it was like a new world, a new earth, as Eckhart Tolle would say. And it was, and I've still kept it to this day. It's like, I'm never alone. I'm always feeling this like connection to, you're calling Source and God. It's just, I think the work we put in is making it grounded into something where it's not just like here and there, but it's almost like the way you view the world. It's like the contact lenses of how you see things, so that it's more committed. And I remember, you just made me think of it, like when I was in yeshiva, I used to mess up, like I would wake up late and miss the time you're supposed to say the Shema in the morning, or little things like that. And I was so sensitive, spiritually sensitive, that it like really pained me. You're not in a fling. Like, this is not you're committed, you and God, it's a marriage. It's something that you will fall many times, and it's something that you will be building and committed to throughout your life. So, yeah, I think I had it before I went to Israel, but the Israel experience and the yeshiva experience was like, how do I make this more like something I can wrap my arms around, make it something more in my mind too, because we have our brains and we need to like have it make sense as well. All those feelings.
Can we go back to Tzfat? Because when you said that, like, I got this ring in Tzfat, and I was there a year ago. And when I went there, it was like the most magical, beautiful place I've ever been. There's like this energy about it. And I know that like it's where Kabbalah kind of started. Can you tell us a little bit now about Kabbalah and like what is this mysticism and energy behind the Torah? And I know that some people also believe that you're not allowed to read the Zohar unless you have like 40 plus years of learning. So can you explain to us like how you found it and the mystery
Absolutely.
of
I love it. I'm very connected to Tzfat. You know, Gabby, you also touched upon Israel and that awareness. So like Jerusalem in Hebrew is Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim, if you break up the word, is Yirah Shalem, which means complete awareness or awe. So when you're in Jerusalem, you feel this like you're not like there's something more going on in this world. It's not just there's 4 holy cities we talk about in Jerusalem, even though the whole land is holy in Israel. Jerusalem is fire. It's the 4 elements. Tzfat is air. Tiberias is water. And Hebron is earth. And you do kind of feel that energy. Like when you're in Tzfat, as you were talking about, you feel like they say a weekday in Tzfat is like a Shabbat anywhere else on earth. Or Rabbi Nachum Mendel Vitebsk, who was a rabbi in the late 1700s, he moved there. He had to move out of Tzfat. So they asked him why. He said, because I couldn't sleep with all the noise from the angels. Like he was a very lofty person. He was, I feel the same thing there. And it is where Kabbalah really had its renaissance in the 1500s. So there's been different periods of Kabbalah. And just to kind of divide up the understanding of what Kabbalah is. So I'm going to do 4 parts. I would say there's the theoretical side, which is the science of the cosmos, science of the divine worlds that exist. Like, how did we get from God to us? And it's not just immediate. There is a whole chain of progression that led to that. And then how do our actions affect back up? And what is that interchange? And the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, he only lived till 38 years old. But he was somebody in Tzfat that really revolutionized and explained the Zohar, which was much, 1500 years prior about. And before him came Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, the Ramak. If you ever walk near the Arizal's mikvah, there's a cemetery in Tzfat, down from the artist colony. You go down and you walk down a little bit. There's also an area of the cemetery where they're all buried next to each other. So you have the Sefer Charedim. He's the author of Yedid Nefesh, my favorite prayer on Friday night. Then you have the Arizal, who we're talking about right now. And then we had the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who kind of like codified, he brought all of Kabbalah together to be understood like an encyclopedia. He was like the Maimonides of mysticism. And then you had Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz, who wrote the Lechadodi. So if you read Lechadodi on Friday night, it's his initials, Shlomo Halevi. That was his name. And he was a teacher of one who was a teacher, and they were all connected. And that was like a time, and I do believe there's like periods in history where things open up, like wisdom. Like you'll see like a break in time, and then all of a sudden it's like Einstein, and then like all these discoveries happen. So we believe it's connected between mystical divine wisdom and secular wisdom, so to speak, that they all kind of explode at the same time. And that was really a big renaissance in, like you said, in Tzfat. Probably because Tzfat is right next to Meron, which is where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, is buried. So they wanted to be near. And I feel it there too. Like when I'm there, I feel a special connection. After theoretical Kabbalah, you could also say there's other branches like meditative, which is not just learning about it, but it's how do I actually connect to God through it and meditate on certain names of God and certain ideas within Jewish mystical teachings that bring a closeness to God. And then there is a third section, which you could call like practical or magical, which is something most Kabbalists, including the Arizal, kind of frowned upon. It's using out Kabbalah to affect reality, which is something from healing to amulets to we know that we talk about how the Maharal, who lived in Prague in Europe, he was facing a lot of anti-Semitism, and he used the Sefer Yetzirah. He used names of God to create a golem, it says, which was like a being that could protect them from. So there is an idea in Kabbalah. You can in the Talmud, we read about how sages would literally like create beings from nothing. So it is pretty not dangerous, but it is something that unless you're at the level that you know what you're doing, that's probably why I think you mentioned, Alex, about the idea of waiting till you're 40. I think it's that part, which is like the really out there stuff, but I think it's also you notice as you get older, your mind matures. I've noticed it with myself. I'm learning things now that I learned when I was younger, but I'm looking at them so different. Like there's so much imagery and analogies in mystical writings, like a maiden walked down 10 gardens and 10 rivers. Like there's no maiden, there's no gardens, there's no rivers, there's no light of God. All this stuff is analogous to a deeper idea and a deeper idea. So that's what's helpful to have a teacher. Kabbalah literally means to receive. You're receiving wisdom from one above you in tradition. That's why most stuff wasn't written down either. And number two is the ability to see things beyond the analogy and to what they call in Hebrew, mafshit min hagashmut, which means remove the physicality of the idea. There's like a lot of romantic imagery even if you read Song of Songs from King Solomon, which is a beautiful thing, it's worth reading because you realize that Judaism is not a religion, it's a relationship. But he talks there, you think it's like The Notebook, like it's this like love story between you and God. What it is though is that all of our human relationships are analogies for our connection to God. God nurtures us like a mother would to a baby in her womb with unconditional love and selfless dedication. Also though, God expects of us, we do raise in our level like a husband and wife where you're giving to each other on an equal level. So it's seeing all these ideas and kind of breaking it down further and looking deeper behind everything. I think it's, even though you're supposed to wait till 40, I think it's a necessity. Even the Arizal and the Baal Shem Tov, which leads us to the fourth and final classification of Kabbalah, which would be like the personal Kabbalah, which means that which affects your day-to-day life. And that was really started by the Hasidic movement, which we see the most of today. Chabad, Breslov. This was the Baal Shem Tov in the 1700s. 1734 was when he really got started, was showing us that you don't need to leave earth to go to heaven, which is what Kabbalah was all about, talking about lofty things so you raise yourself up. How do we bring heaven down to earth? How do we look at a tree, look at a bird, look at the food we're eating and see godliness in it? How can we elevate all of our encounters and our interactions and our relationships and take it to another level? And we desperately need that today. We are at a place where if the Baal Shem Tovs think we needed it in 1700s, today in 2020, we need it now more than ever. And I'm going on for a while, but I'll just quickly just end that off with a story, which is the Baal Shem Tov had a student, and that student had many rabbis who became all the Hasidic movements we see today around the world. One, the Chabad founder, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, he was once walking with Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz, who was against sharing mysticism. He said, don't share these beautiful teachings out to the public. It cheapens it. It lessens it. Keep it for the distinct few who are on the level to really take it. And they saw a paper of teachings in the gutter because it had flown away, and he was incensed. And the Alter Rebbe turned to him and he said, imagine a king, and the king has an only son, and this prince sick, deathly ill. And his advisors say there's one way, king, that you can heal your son. And that way is to take your crown, take the jewel in the center of the crown. You're going to have to grind it up. We're going to put it in a liquid, and maybe one of the drops might be able to save him. And the king said, for my only son, of course I'll do it. And the idea is that these teachings, this beautiful wisdom, even though it's divine and hidden and sacred and should be revered, if it can elevate us in this time of darkness, if it can make us feel a connection to our Father, if it can make us elevate our spirits, God says do it. Like, now's the time not to be shy. We have so much noise coming in so many directions, so much Facebook toxicity. Let's fill it with divine connection and deep ideas and really go for it. So that's kind of the mode I'm in right now.
Yeah, and I feel like, we've seen in pop culture so many people kind of connect to Kabbalah. Like, we've seen Madonna and so many other celebrities. So what do you think the draw is for these people that weren't maybe born Jewish, but really connect to Kabbalah?
So one analogy that's used is like, this is where you have to get into the ability to take it away from the physicality of it. But it's like the king dressed in clothes or the king naked, meaning God's wisdom is brought down into many levels. And those levels, when we're reading Talmud or reading the stories in the Chumash of the Torah, those are all, if you could break it down to what it really is in its essence, like it is, like in Kabbalah, it says the whole Torah is the names of God. Like literally the letters are, everything there is incredibly deep. but we don't always see it. We see stories, we learn about laws, about what to do and what not to do and what to eat and what not to eat. We only see the external layer. And Kabbalah is basically peeking behind the veil and showing you what's behind everything that's going on. So it's very attractive because you're almost like leaping into that that secrecy and that beautiful it's godliness unadulterated. So it's very tantalizing to want to jump straight to the VIP section, to jump right behind to see the playbook and what's going on behind the scenes. And I think that's important. Like, I think we need to connect to God directly and recognize the giver of the Torah. The only thing is, the analogy I was thinking about was, when you take flowers from the earth and you pull it out and you enjoy them and you smell them and you have a great experience with them, they will wilt over time without their foundation of the soil and the nutrients and the water. And without the 3 levels of Torah wisdom beneath it and living that life that kind of aligns, your life needs to align with the teachings that you're taking in. Then it's not as powerful. However, learning that these ideas can inspire you. But I do think Jew and non-Jew alike, and anyone, regardless of background, deserves and is supposed to have access to the deepest wisdom to be able to strengthen their relationship with their source and with God. So I do see positives in this thirst in this generation for Kabbalah. I just hope it's being taught properly.
Let's say somebody is not raised religious. Like, I wasn't raised religious, Gabby wasn't raised religious, and you weren't raised super religious either, right? And they're on a journey towards discovering what is the Torah, what is Kabbalah. Like, how would you start? What is the best way to go throughout that process so that you're learning, I don't want to say properly because there isn't like a proper way, but what's the best way to go about it?
First of all, I think everyone resonates with different teachers and different, I've noticed it with myself. Shameless self-promotion here. I do have not just Instagram page and podcast and all that, but I have a book, Beneath the Surface, which is a very good introductory guide. I think my calling in this generation is really to give over the material in a relatable way for our generation that we can understand and build up that way. So if anybody wants to reach out to me and even just ask me for book recommendations or just learn, I'm happy to, because everyone's different and I can maybe help that way. There's amazing websites out there, Chabad.org and KabbalahOnline.org, and there's authors that I really, and teachers that I really think are great for explaining some of these ideas. And discovery, like any topic you want to get better at and learn about is through discovery and through asking. Ask those that you trust, that you really resonate with what they're teaching and how they're living their lives. To be fair, I've also learned amazing wisdom from those that I don't want to emulate necessarily the way they live. I've been able to separate the two. It's a sorting out process. It's not like one size fits all. But I think if you're earnest in your approach and you're really trying to find and grow, there are amazing resources out there. Random book shout out, World Mask by Rabbi Akiva Tatz is a book I think is really fundamental. And I give a little thank you at the beginning of my book for that. So happy to help. And there's a lot of good material out there. We're really lucky. There's books now being printed that I've just bought that haven't been in print for 700 years. Like, these are incredible books of wisdom and deep mystical wisdom that just never was always in manuscript form. It just wasn't available. We actually have incredible access online and in book form to stuff that no previous generations had. Maybe God knew we needed it. So there's a lot of good stuff out there.
So, Daniel, why did people start studying Kabbalah, like in the 1700s? What led up to this, where people wanted to know the mysticism and understand kind of almost like the Renaissance behind the Torah?
So just to paint the scene, back in the mid-1700s when the Baal Shem Tov really revealed the Hasidic teachings, was there had been massacres throughout Poland, Ukraine, Russia, real devastation, a lot of Jews getting killed, which always happened, but during that time it was extra devastating. And there was also a big divide between the scholars and those that were just simple farmers, and the majority of the community that didn't know were very unlettered. And the Baal Shem Tov came to teach that you can connect the essence of God from the essence of your soul at no matter, regardless of where you're at. It's not just for the great scholars to connect. I was actually talking about this today about just on Instagram. I shared a post that there's a Jewish law that the idea of mikvah, right? You dip in a certain amount, there has to be a certain amount of water in this mikvah to purify yourself. But if you use living waters, meaning if you go into ocean water or lake water, like natural waters, you just immerse yourself fully, you're good to go. You're pure, even if it's less. So the rabbis like to get very theoretical. So he said, what if you could take one drop of that pure water and stretch it so thin, according to like science and physics, that you could cover your body with just one drop of water? Would it purify you? Yes. So water is likened to Torah. Just like water comes from high places and falls low, Torah wisdom comes from the divine and comes down into our world. And by studying one idea that's really true, or doing one mitzvah, or praying to God, wherever you're at, no matter what you did a minute ago or a day ago, in that moment, you are fully immersed and one with God and the divine. And that was like these ideas that showing how precious you are in God's eyes was something that was really needed at that time, and was a real revelation that was needed. If then, how much more so now?
I recently took an intro to Kabbalah class at the Kabbalah Center because a friend invited me, and I thought it was so cool to see all these people, Jews and non-Jews alike, coming together to kind of like find this mutual connection and really try to find God through everything and through all their experiences that they're dealing with in daily life. And I did notice that Kabbalah to me seemed very sci-fi like. A big part of the conversation that evening was talking about like Tikkun, and how, like you had mentioned earlier, about affecting reality, how you can actually change the experience you're having and the people around you. And it wasn't even just creating a new being, but it was creating your own experiences. So let's get into like the sci-fi of it. Are there any concepts that we can get into that would align with what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big, beautiful topic. First fundamental idea is to recognize that wherever you're standing, and this is something that science has now found, where you are, there's many more dimensions. So when we talk about heaven, hell, spiritual realms, is it beyond Mars or beyond Pluto? It's right here, right now. It's just, are you tapped into that level of experience? You know, if a guy's in prison, but he's come to an understanding of what life has led him, and this is a learning experience for him, he might be more free than someone who's in a mansion somewhere, in a beautiful castle somewhere, but is depressed because his kids are all gone. And there's like, two people can be sitting in the same party next to each other and can be in totally different worlds at the same time. And the idea is that according to Kabbalah, there's many worlds that we're in at any moment, and you can really tap into higher dimensions of reality and really be somewhere beyond where you are, where your mind is, you are where your vision is, and where your head's at and your perspective's at. So that's the first like fundamental concept, and that explains why very righteous people were able to manipulate nature and things like that and change their reality, because and we can all do that. You know, if you have a trust, I know The Secret and the law of attraction and all this, Judaism says you just add God to the picture, the source. But if you have that trust that God wants the best for you and will do good for you, you can affect your outcome. The Zohar says that the face you show heaven is the face that's shown back at you. You can cause effects, but it is, you know, just a fundamental idea with the righteous I was talking about was that God created nature as a mask, so that when you see nature, you feel like there's nothing more than this. There's a cycle. The sun comes, the moon comes, I get up, I go to sleep. There's nothing more here. I'm in this cycle. And it's just a mask. If you can peel back behind the mask and see behind the mask, you recognize that God is utilizing nature, but it's the repetition of it that gets us. So like if an elephant flew in the sky when you grew up, you would look at an elephant right now by your window and not think anything of it because it happened before. So no matter how wondrous something is, no matter how incredible nature really is, that's just the way it is. And to start looking, when you start learning this wisdom, you recognize that you peer beneath the surface and you recognize that everything I see is a wonder. Everything I see is miraculous. I think Einstein said that. Einstein said either nothing is a miracle or everything is a miracle. You can live your life either way. And I think that is, the word in Hebrew for nature, hateva, is the same gematria hateva as Elohim, God's name. And the idea is that the word hateva also means sunken, because like when you sink something in water, you don't see it as well. You don't notice God's hand. And the righteous people are so aware, holy people are so aware that this is all just a garment that God is using to express self. They see behind it. Imagine you go to like a Halloween or Purim costume party and you see Alie there dressed and stuff and she's trying to hide so you don't know who she is, and you say, "Hey, Alie, it's you." So she doesn't have to hide from you anymore because you already peeled back, you already know who she is. And these people have done the same. The more you recognize who's behind the costume that is nature, that is this world that God's using, the more God doesn't have to hide from you because your free choice is not going to be affected through miracles. You're not going to, oh my God, a miracle happened. No, I know. Like, I know that, the analogy I used in my book was, imagine you go to like a fancy department store with one of those pianos that's playing on auto, just playing on its own. And you're like, oh, this is great. And then like 10 minutes through your shopping, you hear like a miss in the key, like something went wrong. And then it goes back to normal, perfect music. And you're like, oh, there was really somebody playing music the whole time. So when something divine providence happens for you, something that like reminds you that there's more synchronicity, there's something going on, there's a God controlling this world. The challenge is to bring that into your everyday, boring, the life where you feel like, oh, I'm stuck in traffic. That's not from God. No, the same one who's behind the miraculous things is the same one that's behind the things that everything that's going on. It's just a reminder for you to wake up to that fact. And it really enlivens everything that you see and affects everything you do. Everything you do ceases to be mundane or boring. Like, the Baal Shem Tov says, if you're going into nature and you see a mountain and you say, God, how incredible this is, you might have elevated the whole purpose for that mountain for being created in the first place. That is, and when you take a breath, King David finishes off Psalms. He says, Kol anashama tahallelujah, hallelujah. For every breath, I praise God. And it really means for every soul, but soul is the same word as breath. So we say the same God who, when you look at the universe and it seems so incredible, the massiveness of 100 billion galaxies and 100 billion planets within each of those 100 billion galaxies, that same being who formed that gave you breath. As you breathe in, you're taking in that it's all God. That's what the Baal Shem Tov came to say, basically.
Interesting. I heard you say sight a lot, and you brought dimensions up. I recently was listening to something where they were talking about how we really only use a small percentage of our sight, and the things that we're seeing with our eyes are just like a reflection of light, right? So what are our eyes truly capable of, and why are we only able to see a certain amount of things here when there could be so many other dimensions and things, happening all at the same time? Does Kabbalah get into that at all?
Absolutely. The Baal Shem Tov had, there was a student of his called the Chosev Lublin, which literally means the seer, the one who sees. And it says he was almost blind, but what he could see out of his eye was from one end of the world to the other end of the world. He was able to, I mentioned, we were talking about the movie Interstellar earlier, privately, and the movie shows, no spoiler alert, but the ability when you reach a higher dimension, you can see much more than what space and time show us. So science realizes that there's 4 dimensions, right? There's space, which is 3-dimensional, right? Right, left, front, back, up, down, depth. Then the 4th dimension is time. Well, what if you could transcend that? And that's very much what Einstein went into, a 5th dimension, a higher dimension. So Kabbalah and Judaism, they explain that if you can kind of access a higher place, it's not seeing necessarily with your eyes, which some were able to do, but it's also with your mind's eye. Stability and we see this in our daily life. Like when you meet somebody and you're sensitive, you've attuned yourself to be sensitive to others. You don't see somebody a teenager who says, yeah, everything's fine. Or someone who shrugs you off. You can see past that and you can see that there's something more going on. And the word for face in Hebrew is panim. And the word for inner or within is pnimiyut, the same word, panim, because the face is the place that most shows what's going on inside a person. And that ability to be aware when we look at the world, that's God's face. Like I am seeing a outer manifestation, like my life is the outer face. If I can look at the events of my life and the details and the world around me as well, and learn lessons from that to see what's going on past it. It's giving us hints and clues to a higher reality. And that's what we're after.
Isn't that kind of like where a lot of self-development and spiritual books come in that aren't Jewish related, where they talk about projections and your outer world is really a projection of your inner world. So if you're dealing with someone who's angry, it could be that like you have something inside of you that's angry and it's just an outward reflection.
Correct. I mean, look, true wisdom, I believe, will make its way through every belief system and every, from religion to the movement we're in now, this new age movement from self-help, like you're going to find kernels of truth that will fall. No question about it. regarding what you just said, like the Baal Shem Tov says, like, how could you differentiate the two, right? Like, what if I'm genuinely seeing something wrong in someone else? How do I know it's coming from me? He says that if you were to, and he agrees with that, if you see someone angry, it's a lesson in you, is because, like, if you're not a drug addict and you see someone who's a drug addict, you don't think about them in a mean way. You think of them in a way of like pity, like that's sad. And when we see somebody who does something to us that bothers us, if we don't feel like compassionate, but we're more like, God, this is so annoying, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have that trait, but maybe you have a certain sensitivity to that trait. Maybe there's something within you that's making you, if I see someone who has something that I have no connection to and I've never experienced in my life, and it's not even, I don't look at them the same way as if it's something that like touches me in a different way. So I think that idea is definitely a true idea. And look, psychology literally means ology is study of, and the psyche is the soul or the breath. Like it's study, it is what the Greeks were trying to, we're understanding what's going on beneath the surface. Science will call it the mind, which we don't really know what that is, but the mind. Judaism might call it the soul or the nefesh. So there's different names we give to things, and different definitions are important for sure. Definitions are vital, but when you're starting to see like interconnection between different things, it's okay. There's you just want to make sure you're going to the source and getting it really in a way that you connect with, for sure.
Something that keeps coming up that I see right behind you is Beneath the Surface, right? Like, which is your book, which I want you to talk about a little bit too. But I think one of the cool things about Kabbalah is that it's a study of what's happening beneath the surface. And like, kind of going back to what Gabby was saying, like, well, I took Kabbalah 1, 2, and 3, but we did learn that when something triggers you about another person, it's because a part of that person is actually inside of you. And maybe they're like being viewed as your opponent, but really it's just a projection of something that you need to work on. And right now there's a lot of things in the world that are very like hidden. Like, why is all this chaos going on? Why are all these riots happening? Like, what is this? So my question is, Kabbalistically, what are some of your favorite teachings that kind of help you go from this whole crazy outside world back into understanding the deeper meaning of what's going on underneath the surface?
Very nice question, and very relatable to what we're going through as a culture. Look, this is not even Kabbalistic. The Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who was the founder of the Musar movement, which was came at the same time, around that time, which was self-refinement, character refinement. He said, and this is attributed to many different authors, I'm not sure who, but he said, I tried at first to change the world. You've probably heard this. Then I realized I couldn't really do that, so I tried to change my city. And I realized that was too hard. I tried to change my village, my area, then my town, then my household, like the people around me. I want them to get better. Then I realized I have to first change myself, and that I'm still working on. And once I do that, I'll be able to change my household, city, and beyond. So I think it's great to try to fix injustices in the world, but we also have to see where we can improve. It's much easier to put the blame on other people, but the best way people learn, and we know this from parenting, the best way we learn is from setting example. You want to live in such a way that people can learn from you what you believe in, and not just be yelling like on these Facebook arguments. And my sister-in-law is actually creating a platform. She's trying that Facebook moves away from the post argument, but becomes a messaging. And she's calling it like humanizing discuss. Like there's a human on the other end of that computer and phone, and people just diss each other. So it's again beneath the surface. Look past the phone screen, look past the YouTube comments, look past even the person on the street wearing this hat or wearing this thing, and recognize that there's a human there. And not only is there a human, you don't even know yourself. Like we've only scratched the surface on our own selves. How do we expect to know other people? Like we really don't.
So we stop externalizing everything and start really looking inside of ourselves. Because I think that is one of the wisdoms of Kabbalah, is like, if something's triggering you, it's because it's within you. That's why you're feeling triggered. Even though you're wanting to change the world, I believe the teachings of Kabbalah do take you back to, in order to change the world, you have to first change yourself.
So 100%, but we also, we live in a world where it's not all good. There is, if there's toxic people around you or something bring you down, you can take a step back from that. You can not engage, and you can like realize the dangers or the things that you're not yet at this level where you're totally like, you've now somebody could yell at you in the face and you feel nothing. Like we're not at that point. Maybe we'll get there one day. And that is a personal work to like realize that like I win more by being patient. I win more by not reacting for the long term. When I'm stuck in traffic and at that moment, instead of getting angry, I say, you know what? If I practice patience now, when I get home in 5 minutes and my kids are doing the same thing to me, I have now worked on that trait and I will now be able to engage with them better. I'm using every moment. The Pirkei Avot says, who is wise? Not the smart person, the knowledgeable one, the one who learns from every person. Meaning every moment is an opportunity of God has given you by divine providence that you can learn from it and get better from it. So that's for sure true. But until we get to that perfect state, we have to know what our triggers are, what is going to get us. So I think it's a nice balance of the two, is like recognizing, yes, I need to change inside. I need to fix things within. I need to get better. I don't have to react to everything. But also if you see something that's really like not appropriate or is not, it doesn't mean that you have that thing within you. That it could mean like, I need to make a healthy boundary. I need to make space here. I'm not going to like, it's not their fault. They have their own world going on. I'm not going to judge them, but I'm also going to stay healthy in this loud world that we're in.
So as we go beneath the surface and work on ourselves, especially when it comes to patience, I see that happening a lot right now. People are really suffering. I'm one of those people. I think, Alie, you just raised your hand.
Yeah,
For some
100%.
reason, I'm noticing my patience levels like really diminishing. So what can we do to create that tiny miracle so that we are, being more present and avoiding situations and calming down before we react to something?
So a huge thing in my soul living program and something I talk about a lot is being proactive. A lot of times we're barely making it through, like we're low on sleep, we've got a lot of things coming to us, and then that situation comes our way that we blow up at or we like lose it on. So it's like through prayer, through meditation, through learning daily soul food, we can prepare ourselves when those moments come. We're in a state that we have more of a chance. Like if we're just trying to make it through, but we're going to hit roadblocks and bumps and we're going to fall. But like if you're just a self-aware person and every day you're taking account of how you're growing and how you're learning, it could be a bad day, but if I learned from this day, it was a good day. Working on yourself in a way that inspiring yourself and filling yourself up with good podcasts and good noise like this one, and filling yourself with good creative activities like you guys are doing. This is what quarantine is. Like quarantine can be a depressing thing, or the quarantine time that we've been in can be like when you're planting a seed in the soil. It seems buried. We feel buried, like we're like stuck underneath something, but that's where the seed grows and becomes this beautiful tree. Like this is the chance now to dig deeper within and to like reflect on life. Like, where am I going and what do I want to do? And to be a creative, because I believe creativity does come from discussion, but it also comes from quietness with self and the ability to get rid of all the noise. So if we're sitting at home all day and we're on the phone all day and we're on like all this stuff, I think we're defeating the whole purpose of what this is about. We want to find ways to be creative, to connect to our soul, to use this as a positive opportunity. This is a very difficult, unprecedented time for us. You got to have some self-compassion on yourself. And that's part of the long haul journey. It's not being like soft. Like if you're an achiever, it's not being soft to mess up and not destroy yourself over it. It's the long haul because you're dedicated to being the best person you can be. And by having that self-compassion, recognizing this is one step on my journey, I'm going to learn from this and get better, then you have a good chance at succeeding at creating a beautiful life for yourself.
Can you talk a little bit about your book, Beneath the Surface? Because I feel like we're touching on this beneath the surface the whole conversation. So what is that about?
When I left Santa Barbara at 19 and I went to Jerusalem, I was learning so many powerful ideas every week that I had to be able to, I wanted to give it over to people. I didn't want to keep it to myself. So I created like an email list and I just started sending it out to friends and family. And my thing, I guess, my ADD self, especially back then, very distracted, is I didn't want it to be long-winded. So if I heard a 5.5 hour idea, I wanted to be able to give it over in a few paragraphs. What was the essence of that idea? What was the really deep idea behind it? And that's what became my book. It was a collection of like 6 years of these weekly emails. And I guess the reason I focus on Beneath the Surface is, of course, I'd love all of us to transform our lives and to become, completely elevated individuals. But the goal of the book is that a reader will look at the world a little bit more beneath the surface after reading it. Look at each other beyond, as we spoke about a moment ago, look at each other differently. And also, as we spoke about earlier, is looking at the world differently. That I'm not going to walk outside and see a bird and say, oh, I've seen this before, but I'm going to like recognize that there's something more going on here, that the world didn't have to have color. Food didn't have to have taste. Everything we experience, like when you taste something good, that is the Shekhinah, the divine sparks. That is, if this is good, how much more delicious and amazing must the source be? So everything that the world pulls us in, all the like desires and temptations that our generation is coming at us at all directions, to recognize that all of this is good, it's nice, but imagine how much more incredible the source of all that must be. Why don't I connect myself to the source? And the Tzemach Tzedek, there's a book right here. On the first page of this book, he lived in the 1800s. The first page of this book, he says, if you lived as a king or queen for thousands of years with every single possible temptation and pleasure, it wouldn't equate to one moment in the next world. So there's a quality difference, and the more we can tap into that idea, I think was an idea of the book, to just recognize that there's something precious that we're not spending enough time in. And finally, I think Lubavitch Rebbe said, you will not be happy unless you nourish your soul as much as your body, which I think is a perfect name for your podcast, because the Torah says, not only on bread do you live, but on the word of God do you live. The divine energy within the food gives life to our soul, just as the physical nutrients of the bread gives life to our bodies. We need both.
It's amazing.
Love that.
To just like wrap this all up, I know before we were talking about elevating the soul and nourishing the soul, but you had also brought up meditation and how important that is to kind of help become self-aware, and also with patience, like we mentioned we're struggling with. I notice personally when I'm meditating that I'm also having these creative light bulb moments randomly now that I'm doing it more often. And I know you mentioned now is a great time with all this chaos going on in the world that we get creative. So what do you find to be benefits of meditation? And are you receiving like these light bulb moments as well? Do you feel like there are little downloads from Hashem telling you like, go in this direction? Is that also playing into Kabbalah?
Absolutely. It is Chachma, one of the highest sfirot, wisdom that we have. The reason we can't channel this download, I mean, if you look at any amazing artist or athlete or speaker, they'll tell you that in their states of, we call it flow, at that state, they are almost, it's beyond them. They're becoming a vessel. Like before I do public speaking, I'll prepare a lot. But before I start, I say, God, just channel through me what needs to be said. And that ability, that Moses was the greatest prophet because he had that ability to have that humility and that openness to something more. And, you know, I find personally that there's so much noise outside your phone, your, even your work emails and the noise from people around us and all that. But let's say you take a vacation or you have a quarantine and you isolate yourself and you go to a beautiful island, or you're even alone at home. There's still inner noise. There's all the anxieties and the worries and the racing thoughts. So the goal is to get past both. And for me personally, it's been music. I do best, I guess the music reverberates back on the racing thoughts and they hit each other and just create this almost like a trance-like state. But I find I play, when I lead Jewish meditations, I do like sound bowls, crystal sound bowls, or I do shruti box or different instruments, because I think it really helps us drop in. And everyone has their way. It could be through breathing exercises. The Kabbalists talk about breathing as you use Hebrew letters, and there's a whole mantra meditation with that. There's different methods, to each their own. But my personal thing is that I find throughout my life, I'm a late night person. So the Kabbalists talk about midnight, and it's halachic midnight, so it's usually like 12:30 or so, is an opportune time to be in solitude with God. But in general, a time when everyone's asleep, or there's a certain feeling when you know not only is your house asleep, but the city is asleep. And like, I have a place, I sit and I have my music, I have my thing. And what the mystics would do, and all the way back to King David, is they would mourn the exile. So we believe God and all of us are in a lot of pain because we're disconnected. There's not revelation, and that's because we're in exile. And we mourn that, and we almost, for me, it's a time to sit and just connect. I don't think of anything per se. I don't I just listen and I go deeper within. And thank God, I'm just lucky that I've been blessed since that time when I was 16, that change in my life. I can easily kind of just shift into that. And when I get into that state, not just do ideas flow, but it's like essence, like everything you think about in your day-to-day way becomes like, you see like, oh, like the equation behind everything. You like kind of everything starts to make sense. And I've had insights there that I almost was thinking for my next book of like making something, an assembly of all those insights that come during that time, but I don't think I've recorded enough of them. But to say that, yes, I believe meditation is powerful. I think there's many different ways to do it. And I think it's a great way to like get in touch with insights or yourself, like what you're all about and what you believe in, because there's no more noise from people telling you what to believe in. You can now go deeper within yourself and like feel, remember we were saying earlier, like we don't even know ourselves. That's what I mean. Like you get glimpses, like there's Gabby, the podcast, like extraordinaire, and Alex, like all of you have I'm the rabbi, like we have our things, but we're more than that. Like there's who you are, and we haven't even discovered that. Like there's a you that's way beyond anything good you'll do and any like talents we have, which are all important because we got to make this world into a dwelling place for God. But getting in touch with, and when you get in touch with that, you recognize that you are priceless. Like it doesn't matter. You're not defined by the outer stuff. So I think it's definitely vital.
We're all just actors in the movie. I
Yep.
learned in Kabbalah too, like we're all just playing a part and we're showing our masks. Like you're Daniel, I'm Alexandra, she's Gabrielle, but we're really just souls having a human experience, right?
Yeah. And if we can permeate that acting's important. Like if we can permeate our unique talents and our unique way we see the world, like that's vital. Use that, but just channel it from the higher self and don't be defined by the outer self, but also make sure that you don't just stay in that lofty place, but you bring it out into your daily life and all the like world we live. That's the goal. The goal is to merge the two, not get too away, bring heaven down to earth as we spoke about. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
it's so interesting. I feel like this whole conversation, I'm seeing so many metaphors that even though we're in the physical world, but we're having a soul experience too, we're having those like physical experiences, just like, for example, when we had that private conversation about internet, right? The internet connection. We're also Mercury retrograde right now, guys. So I'm not surprised that the communication and the connection's a little bit wacky. But when Spectrum's having all these issues. I'm a Spectrum user. So like they're having issues lately because everyone's at home using their bandwidth and there's not enough Mbps to go around, even though you think this company would have prepared for that because they supply internet and television. It's just like that with our physical experience and the noise you mentioned, because if the bandwidth is too stretched and everyone's utilizing it throughout the day, then like you're not gonna be able to connect as well, right? And we're trying to connect to the internet. It's not working out so well when everyone's on it. So that same connection with Hashem, I think, is a little bit easier. Here's a metaphor for you: when the city is asleep, like you mentioned, Rabbi Bortz.
I love it. And remember, when you open your computer, the reason you can connect to Wi-Fi is because it's all around you. It's there. So if we become antennas, like radio, if we become antennas, God's sending this incredible abundance to us and this beautiful divine connection at all times. But if we just have to wake up to it, if we become aware of it, antennas, then we start to hear the music. And you see these guys praying at the Western Wall, like full of devotion, and you're coming like from a bagel, like you walk up, you're like, what's going on here? They're just feeling it. They're feeling in tune with that. So instead of looking at people at concerts or at a Western Wall as crazy, it's like, maybe we're not hearing the music. Maybe I need to find ways to create more bandwidth and be able to become antennas for that frequency.
Amazing. And I feel like anyone who's listening right now is doing that as we speak. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. This was an absolute pleasure to have you, the Millennial Rabbi. I feel like we've had so many lessons learned in the short, 45 to an hour that we've been doing this, but also a little bit deeper of a discussion into Kabbalah. So if people want to connect with you or do any of your programs, following this, where can they find you?
I got a nickname, Millennial Rabbi, that kind of stuck, embracing technology in our generation. So at Millennial Rabbi on Instagram, on Facebook, Millennial Rabbi, and please reach out on all platforms, millennialrabbi.com. And I'm happy to connect with anybody who has any questions or wants to learn anything. I get a lot of pleasure from that.
Maybe we can have you back for more discussion for Kabbalah. So in the meantime, let's have an amazing day. Let's tune into our inner. We all need to practice these Bodhidut too, right? Like praying to God, having those private conversations.
Exactly. And keep feeding the soul, right?
Yes.
Soul.
Guys, like this episode, follow us, follow Dr. Bortz. Just kidding.
My dad's a Dr.
No,
Bortz, so
Your dad,
Rabbi Bortz.
Jewish.
doctor of the soul. I didn't follow my dad's footsteps, so I'm trying to heal the soul. Yeah.
Baruch Hashem. Amazing. All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in today. We love you. We appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. Love your two favorite Jewish girls and Rabbi Bortz.
See you guys next time. Bye.